and Marco, who are actually going to be taking the session tonight, and they'll introduce themselves and stuff like that. But as I say, just to reiterate, this is your session for you as parents. So please, if you've got any questions, feel free to ask them. Okay, guys, I just want to hand over to yourself, to James and Marco.
Hi everyone. This is Marco van Bon. I am a cycling coach from the Netherlands. Today, James Sprague and I will tell you a bit about our view on talent development, and we will zoom in on some of the subjects discussed in our book, Optimal Talent Development in Cycling. Later on, James and I will tell you a bit more about ourselves, but first, I still want to address the technical part of this presentation because I don't see everybody online yet. During our presentation, we would like to get some feedback from you on certain topics, and for this we are using Hypersay. This is the system that you see on your screen, the big purple screen. So if you could be so kind to scan the barcode, if you haven't done so already, on your screen with your mobile phone. You can do this with your camera. This will automatically direct you to the website of Hypersay, where you can enter your name and join the presentation, and then you can say hi, like Gary just did. When you join us, you can ask questions to us through the Hypersay system, which is nice because we would like to hear what you have to say, and it also enables us to ask you questions. So please scan the code. And if you can't scan the code with your phone, you can simply open the browser on your telephone and type in the address hc.co, and then put in the code. And then this will also allow you to join the session. I think the URL and the code is also put in the chat, I think in the chat mode of Zoom.
Yeah, they're both in the chat from the Zoom. So yeah, once you move on, they're there for people to sign on.
That's also possible.
If your phone goes to sleep and then you kind of wake it up, you might just have to give it a moment to connect to the Hypersay each time, or just hit refresh and it'll connect automatically. If you just have any problems with that.
That's great. We already have 20 people now, 40 people in total in Zoom. So very nice. Now we love to get your feedback, so this is a great way to do so. Okay, I think we're not getting more and more people, so I'm just going to start. But if you want to join later, please go to the chat room and use the URL. Okay, I'm going to start the presentation. Right. First of all, I want to thank the Irish Cycling Federation for inviting us. James and I are very happy to talk to you about talent development because it's a subject that is close to our hearts. We also believe it's an important subject because we are impacting the lives of children. And coaches and parents are, for a large part, responsible for the things children learn and which kind of experiences they have. So how we think about talent development and how we act within this context has significant effect on the lives of these children. So I think it's an important subject. Lately, talent development has been under scrutiny here in the Netherlands. There has been a lot of commotion about the national gymnastic coaches putting too much pressure on young girls. It went as far that coaches were intimidating girls and invoking fear in the hope that they would perform better. There are still people who believe that coaches and parents need to put heavy pressure on children in order for them to develop their talents. Well, from our point of view, this is a misconception, and we will address this misconception in our presentation. In our book, Optimal Talent Development in Cycling, which you can buy on Amazon, we try to provide a framework for talent development that is inclusive. And inclusive means for everyone, and based on positive encouragement of young athletes. And it's also backed up by the latest scientific insights. Before we go on, as you can hear, I am not a native English speaker, so please bear with me if I have trouble finding the right words sometimes, but I'll do my best. We also have to deal with the limitations of an online webinar. It gives us less opportunity to interact. But like I said before, we are very interested in what you think, what your questions are. Ask your questions through Hypersay during the presentation, and once in a while we'll stop our presentation and we'll do a breakout, as we call it, and we'll try to answer your questions straight away. So let's tell you a bit about the book of ours that came out, and why we felt the need to reassess the way we develop talent. Looking back on how we have dealt with talent development in young cyclists, two questions emerged. The first question was, how can we make sure that talent development is just not for a few talented riders? And in this sentence, I would like to place talented between quotes, because as we will discuss in this presentation, it's pretty hard to define what talent actually is. And that brings me straight to the second question. How is it that even experienced coaches have such a poor success rate in selecting talent? A lot of the athletes that we branded to be successful when they were young and they were selected for talent programs did not make it to the top. And at the same time, there were also quite a few riders, contrary to our belief that they were not good enough, that made it to the top. So an example of this is Nicky Terpstra, who wasn't considered very talented when he was young, but later on he won Paris-Roubaix as a professional cyclist. So the answer to both these questions is actually not so complicated. We need to be more inclusive. Inclusive means we have to make sure that talent development is available for everyone. However, the implementation of being inclusive is actually very hard. So I believe an important reason for this is that we tend to pay only attention to the winners. We look at the ones that are winning right now, but we forget to look over our shoulders and to see what might be that there might be even more talented riders lacking behind for some of the reasons that we will be discussing today. And then there is another thing. Only a very few young and talented riders will make it to the top. By facilitating the development of talents in all our youngsters, we are not only enlarging the group that may reach top level, but we also open up the possibilities for every cyclist to have a positive experience. And this positive experience is, of course, what it should be all about. More than anything, children should have fun during this process of talent development. And I would argue the same should be true for the parents. That should be true for the coaches. We should all have fun in this process. So let's start with some. Let's go to the next slide. Where's my mouse? Yeah. Let's start with some background information on James and me. I'm from a cycling family in the Netherlands. I have two brothers. Two of my brothers were professional cyclists. One of my brothers, Leon, was one of the top cyclists in the 90s in the world. And my co-writer and cycling coach, James Sprague, was also a professional cyclist, and he was even in the same team as my brother. So please, James, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I was lucky enough to be a professional cyclist for 9 years. Spent a couple of those years riding alongside Leon van Bon, who's Marco's brother. I'd like to point out he was a little bit older than I was. We were at very different ends of our career at the time. So as I said, yeah, I was 9 years a professional. I came up through the British Cycling Talent Development Program, so the talent team, and then I didn't make it as an under 23 into the what they call the academy, and so I went abroad to France and kind of forged my own path there. So I have experience from a rider's perspective of the talent development program, but also from a coach's perspective. So as a coach, I work with a wide range of athletes. So I work from juniors all the way through to European and World Championship medalists. To give you someone that you might have heard of, Lydia Boylan, who's obviously an Irish cyclist, has won European and World medals. I've been her coach for the last 10 years. So we've gone through the whole development process with Lids up to the level that she's currently at. On top of working as a coach, I'm also a PhD student at the Department of Exercise Science and Sport Medicine in Cape Town. And I also do some work in the men's World Tour with Bora Hansgrohe. So that's my background and what I'm currently up to.
Thank you, James. Like I said, I come from a cycling family. I started cycling myself at the age of 10. And as a kid, I was truly inspired by the TI Rally team. That time, I'm talking about 1978, 1979, were dominating professional cycling. My idols were Jan Raas, Gerrit Neteman, Henny Kuipers, Wil Toetemelk. And as a young boy, I took the mud guards of my bike and put curved handlebars on my bike, and I pretended to be Henny Kuiper. Inspiration, that's what you need as a youngster. And although in the Netherlands, the Van Bon family is known as a cycling family, my family was not involved in cycling one way or another when I started at the age of 10. And when I reached the age of 15, I started to win races. And as a junior, I did very well. And my own expectations and also the expectations of other people around me were very high. I was going to be a professional rider at some point. That's what I thought. But things turned out quite differently. And although I managed to get some good results, it didn't come close to the expectations that I had and what other people had of me. My 4-year younger brother Leon started cycling at the age of 8. He started winning when he was 14, and by the age of 16, he was almost unbeatable. He went to the Olympics when he was 19 years old, won the silver medal on the point race, and after that he turned professional. He was a highly successful professional cyclist for almost 20 years. And for example, he won 2 stages in the Tour de France. I also have another brother, Matthijs. He's 6 years younger than I am. I coached him for 6 years when he was a professional cyclist. He also started young, but he did not start winning straight away. Eventually, he became Dutch champion on the track several times, but he developed slowly but steadily. And eventually, he also reached a professional status. And one of the main reasons why my brothers and I experienced success was without a doubt the support of my parents. Where would a young cyclist be when parents wouldn't help them to get ready for a club training or prepare and go with them to races every weekend all throughout the country? And even more important is the support a child gets to overcome setbacks and obstacles. So coming from a cycling family, I know this is an enormous amount of work for the parents. And it impacts the lives of all the family members, also the brothers and sisters who don't cycle. So the support that I and my brothers received was crucial. But why did we go through such different paths of development? We were 3 brothers with similar gene pools, and why was the first child, me, less successful than the younger 2 brothers? Was Leon intrinsically the superior cyclist? Maybe he was. But a crucial difference was the fact that when I started, my parents did not know anything about cycling. So it was very difficult to help me. Another difference was also that Leon and Matthijs found a good coach at an early age. And I think here lies the key in proper talent development. Knowledgeable parents and good coaches can create an environment in which a young athlete can prosper. This is also the reason why I'm active as a talent coach, as a development coach. I want to create the conditions that allow these young athletes to develop and boost their confidence to do so. So at the moment, I'm training and coaching about 25 riders in the age group from 16 to 26. These are all dedicated boys and girls, some at the beginning of their development, some closing the gap to a professional level, some professionals in the early stages of their career. I'm particularly active for Street Jump, which is a junior team in the Netherlands. I'm also working for Jumbo-Visma and for the Dutch Cycling Federation. But enough about us. We like to know who you are. So we have our first question for you. And here it is. And I think you can see that on your phone right now. So please answer this question and see if you have a child in the age ranges that we have here in the question. Ah, okay.
Okay.
Do you want to react, James, or should I?
I can say a few things and you can come back.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So I think that's really interesting. So we've got mainly juniors, youth riders, and below, and even these age ranges of 8 to 11, 12 to 14, and 16 to 19 actually span quite a wide developmental range. So we'll come on to that a little bit later in the talk, but it's quite interesting that, you know, we've got predominantly parents of younger children here. And so we can certainly kind of focus in on those areas later on in the talk.
Yes, definitely. So let's go to our next slide. I'll give you a little outline of our program today. James is going to kick off with what is talent? How can we define talent? Which factors are important? In the second part, I will enlighten you about the growth spurt and how the growth spurt is a defining moment in the development of a cyclist. The growth spurt also defines the boundaries of the development stages a young athlete goes through. James will talk about the development stages later. And then last but not least, we'll discuss the 9 core values that we outlined in our book. And James will talk about the changing role of coaches and parents during the development process, because it's not, you don't have the same role when you have a child of 8 years old or when the child is 12 or 16. So that's all changing. James is going to say more about that. So let's start with the good stuff. James, please take it away.
So we're going to start by asking you what you think talent is. It's important for us to get an idea of what you think talent is, and that gives an idea of how we can shape the talk and maybe convince you otherwise, maybe convince you agree with us, but it's good to get a really good sense of what you think talent is and how you would define talent before we kind of kick off. So yeah, if you could answer the question that's either up on your phones or up on the screen, that'd be great. Okay, we'll just give you a second or so to have a look at that. Okay, right, what do we have here? This is one of my favorite little bits of the talk, because we get to see, you know, where people's current thinking is. And so interestingly, no one's gone for talent as defined by your physical abilities. I would agree and disagree with that statement. So it's interesting that no one's gone for it. You could argue that everybody has a defined maximum potential, okay? And some of that in cycling is going to be defined by your physical abilities. You know, you certainly need to have a certain physical capacities to be able to make it as a professional rider. Just because you have that capacity doesn't mean you necessarily will make it as a professional rider. But without that capacity, you probably will never make the grade. And so we have a few have gone for everyone is talented. Yeah, I would generally agree with that statement. I think we're not all talented in the same way. And you know, we know this intrinsically from looking at different children and where, you know, the areas in which they kind of they shine. But I would agree that everyone is talented. And certainly, you know, we can develop the strengths of each individual and their weaknesses. But yeah, I would certainly agree with the statement that everyone is talented. So we've got a few for talent as a mindset. Again, it's one of those statements that I would, to a certain degree, agree with. Having a mindset is certainly important. Having a performance mindset, having a growth mindset is certainly important. One thing I will say on the mindset side of things is we tend to believe that our mindset is fixed and that it can't be changed. You know, we're certainly intrinsically motivated to a certain degree, or we don't deal with stress very well. But actually, your mindset or your kind of psychological capacities are just probably as trainable as your physiological capacities. Okay, so most of you went for talent is one's potential and needs to be developed. Yes, certainly. So it is, what is the talent of this child? and how can we best develop that in order to make the most of that talent. Now, the question is, how do we know what that potential is at an early age? And that's something we will kind of come on to. Maybe can we assess that, or can't we assess that? Is that actually something we can't assess at an early age, and we can only maybe quantify right at the end of someone's career? So talent is outperforming others, and I'm quite glad no one went for that. Performance, and we'll get onto this in the next slide, is probably just a snapshot of where someone's currently at, not necessarily reflective of how they got to that point or where they're going in the future. But we'll touch on that more in the next slide. And then we've got one each for talent is how well someone performs, and talent does not exist. Okay, so they're quite interesting. So talent is how well someone performs. Again, I would come back to the snapshot idea on that one. So how someone's performing today is just a snapshot of today. And as we'll get onto, we don't really know how we got to this point, and we don't really know where we're going to go from this point. So we don't know the trajectory of an athlete. And talent does not exist. Interesting. I don't even really know what to say about that one. So talent does not exist is a really interesting phrase, because we all know people that are good at something, but is that headroom, that maximal capacity, the same for every athlete? Probably not, to be honest. But just because someone has that greater capacity overall, does that mean they're going to outshine someone with a lower capacity who maybe kind of reaches a higher percentage of that capacity? That's probably a different question. Okay, Marco, let's go on to the next slide. So I've already touched on some of the ideas in this slide when I went through the answers to your answers to that question. So let's deal with the present first of all. So when we're talking about the present, we're talking about what is happening right now in the moment. So a great example of that might be race results. So who crossed the finish line first, who was second, who was third in a given race. However, that only really shows us a snapshot of today. Even if we take a performance test, it's just a snapshot of what the rider's currently doing. It doesn't tell us anything about how they got to that point or how they might progress from this point onwards. We'll get onto a little bit later in the talk, but there may be some developmental issues there. So, is a rider just more physically developed? Have they gone through their growth spurt earlier and therefore they've, got a current advantage? Have they just been in the sport longer and therefore they've got an advantage? So there's a lot of factors that make up performance at any given time. But when we assess performance, however we decide to do that in the present, all we're actually looking at is one snapshot. It doesn't tell us about the past or the future. So whenever you look at a snapshot in time, actually you need to see what was the route to get to that point. So junior cycling is a great example, so under 19 cycling. At that age, we tend to see big differences in the amount that people are training, how professional they are in their training, are they working with a coach, are they not working with a coach? And if we take snapshots at that period, what we might be picking up is just the riders that have worked, are working at a more professional level to create those performances at the moment. We don't necessarily know that they're the most talented athletes. There's a great phrase by Benjamin Bloom that's, we were looking for exceptional talent and what we found were exceptional circumstances. So we have to be incredibly careful in talent development that we aren't just looking for exceptional circumstances, the riders that have had the most support, the riders that have trained the most, the riders that have had the best coaches, okay? All that can lead to very good present performances, but those riders might actually already be right up there with their maximal capacity or how good they're going to be, and therefore might not go on into the future to carry on improving. So we have to be a little bit careful with the past, and we have to put the past into context. So if we don't actually know that much about the present, the past needs to be put into context, then it's incredibly difficult to predict the future, okay? So the only way we could possibly predict the future is via trajectories, okay? But even that is only taken into context, what they've previously done, and we end up essentially looking for those exceptional circumstances again, rather than exceptional talents. probably the best predictor, if you like, of future performance is trainability. And that's why we've got it up on the slide. Talent development should be about maximizing the potential of each athlete. And therefore, in order to do that, you need to be trainable. You need to be coachable. You need to take what you have and improve upon it, have that growth mindset, have that improvement mindset. And that trainability in itself is a talent, and it's one that often gets forgotten. So, we tend to focus on peak sprint power or VO2 max if we're kind of going down a physiology route, or race performances, whatever we kind of focus on. What we don't tend to take into account to a great enough extent is trainability. And trainability is going to dictate how much of your maximal capacity you're able to exploit and how much you're going to develop. One final thing on that slide is that you could argue that we don't actually know how talented a rider is or until the end of their career. And there's a great quote by Gianni Buffon, who's a footballer in Italy, and he actually said that, I never knew how talented I was until the end of my career. It's only when you get and you reach that peak of your performances and you look back on what you've done and said, okay, well, I really maximized this potential and I really maximized that potential and I worked as hard as I can here and maybe I didn't quite maximize myself here, that you can actually quantify how much talent you actually had, because then you have an idea of how much of your potential you reached. So going into the future is always really difficult, and that poses unique questions when we're trying to select riders at a young age.
One too many, yeah.
So here we have a nice video that talks about that in a different way. It talks about talent shouters and talent whisperers. Those athletes that shout their talent, they're getting all the results. They're saying, yeah, look at me, I'm talented. And those athletes that are just going under the surface a little bit, they're maybe talent whisperers, and they're the ones that may end up being the top performers in the future.
On a June day in 2005 at the Olympic Stadium in Athens, the world record on the 100 meters were broken. People were shocked, not because the world record had fallen, but more because it was a totally unknown man who smashed it. The guy's name was Asafa Powell, a 22-year-old Jamaican sprinter. Only 3 years earlier, Asafa Powell was just another Jamaican teenager wandering about in Kingston, Jamaica, trying to find a place to train. His best time for the 100 meter was far from impressive, and he was rejected by almost all colleges in Jamaica. Nobody believed in his potential. So it was also a mixture of surprise and wonder that was left hanging in the summer air over the Olympic Stadium in Athens on this June evening in 2005. How could an unknown Jamaican develop in just a few years from a mediocre sprinter to the fastest man on the planet? Well, it turns out that Asafa Powell's story is not an exception at all. Speak with business leaders, sports coaches, music teachers, and scientists all over the world, and they all have their own Asafa Powell story to tell. Stories about people who were overlooked but turned out to be superstars. Let me give you a few examples. Ronaldo, the Brazilian soccer player who was named as the world's best 3 times. When he was 15 years old, the biggest Brazilian soccer club, Flamengo, refused to pay Ronaldo's bus ticket from his home to the training ground. A return ticket was priced less than $1. Another example is Michael Jordan, the world's best basketball player ever, who was cut from his high school team at the age of 16. Richard Branson. As many other of the world's most successful entrepreneurs, Branson is dyslexic and was in his early life categorized as a low performer in school. Or take Paul McCartney, who went through his entire education without anyone noticing he had any musical talent at all. It seems like that mastering the art of talent identification is an extremely tough discipline. And the harsh truth is that the vast majority of the talent ID programs out there are no better than drawing lots. As Capital One CEO Richard Fairbank has said, at most companies, people spend 2% of their time recruiting, and 75% of their time managing their recruiting mistakes. And in retrospect, we laugh at the soccer coaches who refused to pay Ronaldo's bus ticket, the music teacher who overlooked Paul McCartney, and the college coaches who rejected Asafa Powell time after time. How can you overlook the potential of world-class performers like that? An easy way to understand why we mess up talent identification is to separate performance from potential. Imagine a matrix like this. The x-axis assesses potential. How good can a person become in the future, short-term as well as long-term? The y-axis assesses current performance, the result that a person delivers here and now. Let me give you an example. Usain Bolt, the fastest man on the planet, and the guy who ended up beating Asafa Powell's world record. Bolt is one of those people who was spectacular even in childhood. Already at the age of 13, he was predicted to be the man who would set new standards in the sprint distances. In our matrix, people like Bolt are categorized as high performers and high potential. Usain Bolt is an example of what you would call a shouting talent. Asafa Powell, on the other hand, demonstrated nothing extraordinary in his early performances. Even at age 18, his performance was really average. The same was true for Paul McCartney, Ronaldo, and Michael Jordan. For some reason, their potential did not manifest in current high performance. They're all examples of what you could call whispering talents. And that's just the point. How do you find potential in something that looks ordinary at the moment? How do you spot a superstar who is not yet a superstar?
Well, let's dive a little bit into the theme of this little movie here, this little movie clip. For those of you who have more than one child, the thing we'll talk about in this slide will be familiar, I think. I have two daughters myself, and one of the first things I learned is that what I took for granted with one child is completely different for the other. For example, your first child will start to crawl before they walk, while the other might skip the phase of crawling altogether and start walking straight away. My point is, children learn and develop at different rates. And the same can be said about how a young athlete, but also full-grown athletes, respond to training. Every athlete responds differently to training and follows his own path of development. We know from research, but also this is the experience of coaches, that some athletes respond extremely well to training, while others sometimes even experience a negative effect. The people that respond well to training are called large responders, and the people who respond poorly to training are called small responders. But we have to be very careful with these terms, though. Why is it that someone is a small responder? Is it because their bodies don't adapt well, or is the training stimulus just not right? Still, there are individual differences in how athletes respond to training. Part of this can be explained by genetic makeup, but also how much and in what way an athlete has trained in the past makes a difference. So, one note here, of course, it's not the case that there are only large and only small responders. We are talking about a continuum here. So you have a continuum starting from small responders all the way up to people who respond very well to training. And then there is another phenomenon, and that is called early bloomers and late bloomers. Some athletes progress right from the start. Those are the early bloomers. And for others, it takes a while before they start improving. Those are the late bloomers. In youth sport, the late bloomers are heavily correlated with the growth spurt. So we'll get into that later. So what do you get when you combine those two concepts? Well, look at the graph. We have training adaptation here on the y-axis. Training adaptation is how much you get better when you train. We have time on the x-axis. The red line displays the early bloomers that are also large responders. So they respond quickly and they keep improving to top level. Remco Evenepoel is such a rider. My brother Leon was also an early bloomer and a large responder. In the movie you just saw, they were called the talent shouters. But there are also early bloomers who will fade out quickly. That's the blue line. These cyclists look promising when they start, but in the end, they cannot meet expectations. They turn out to be small responders. The talent that we often don't spot are the late bloomers that are also large responders. This is the green line. They don't show promise at first, but given time, these cyclists can become top riders. These are the talent whisperers from the movie clip. It is these riders in particular why we have to be more inclusive in our talent development programs. You also have late bloomers that don't respond well to training. That's the yellow line. I think probably these are the people that don't like to do sports at all. If you don't see a lot of effect when you train, it's not very nice to do. But look at this graph. We have time on our x-axis. And imagine that your son or daughter is at the beginning of this timeline. And we don't know how they're going to develop. Is he an early bloomer? Is he a large or a small responder? We don't know in advance. You have to find out. Time will tell. Only time will tell. That is why we should avoid to put too much pressure on the ones that are doing well at an early age. And we have to keep encouraging the ones that are struggling a bit more. But above all these athletes are improving in some way. And this process of improving can be a great source of fun and satisfaction. Let's go to our next slide.
Just on that last slide, Marco.
Oh, yeah, okay.
To put into context just how bad we are currently at identifying those late bloomers, a study was recently done in athletics, and it looked at the top 50 athletes in running, jumping, and throwing as elites. Okay? 75% of those athletes were not in the top 50 in the world as under 18s. So all those early bloomers that were really good at under 18s levels, only 25% of those made the transition into being elite level athletes as an elite, a fully grown athlete, not an age group athlete. So that puts into context, we are 75% wrong at the moment with the athletes that we select who are going to be world-class athletes. And that puts into context just how difficult it is to identify who's just an early bloomer, with a fast and large effect, and who's going to be that late bloomer with a slow and large effect.
Well, now that you have all this information, we can ask you a question. Which one of these cyclists is going to be more successful? We have rider A, who is a highly motivated rider, and also a rider who has good results. He's winning races, he's doing good tests, and he has a strong appropriation of the form of life. And the form of life we described as this in our book, means that they know what cycling life means. They have a sort of performance lifestyle that is needed to perform well in cycling. So they know how to train, they know how to eat, they know that they have to go to bed early, they find a good coach, etc., etc. This is form of life. This rider A is already very well on the way to have a good performance lifestyle. And this rider A has also done a lot of training. Then we have rider B, who is highly motivated as well, at some good results, but he doesn't really have a form of life. He doesn't have an example like an older brother or a father or an uncle that's also a cyclist. So he doesn't really know what to do. And he doesn't train a lot as well. And then we have rider C, also highly motivated, You don't see him in races a lot. I mean, he's always at the back, but it's a small guy. And here in Holland, a lot of these races are on the dike with a lot of wind. So the big guys start to be better, are usually better than the smaller guys. So he still doesn't have a form of life, but he's done a reasonable amount of training. So I want to ask you this: which rider is most likely to become a pro cyclist? Please let us know. Interestingly enough, we have a lot of diverse answers, and it's a bit of a trick question. We have been saying that it's very difficult to project how and to what extent someone will develop. So probably, ideally, you would say you can't tell. 11 people shows that answer. And sure, rider A is already much closer to professional level, both in terms of performance as in mindset, but does rider A truly have more potential than rider B or C? That is hard to say, because it depends on how each individual rider will grow and develop in the future. Like James just said, we see a lot of these riders in the national junior team that already train 30 hours a week as a junior. And we are comparing them with others that train only 10 hours a week. So it's very hard to say which rider has more potential, because one has used this potential much more than the other. The reality is, however, that in 99% of cases, rider A will be more successful, because rider A will be noticed. And this will give rider A access to better coaching, facilities, opportunities. And as a result, rider A will get into that very important flow where all things go right. They get good coaching that will lead to better results, that will lead to more motivation, will lead to better results, leads to more opportunities, etc., etc. So often it is the case that it is rider A, but we should be cautious because we don't really know who it is going to be.
I'm feeling a little bit sorry for rider C, if I'm honest.
Yeah.
No one's got any faith.
Yeah. You have anything to add still, James? Or
No, Nick, the next one.
okay. All right. Do we already have some questions?
We already have some questions, so I'm going to ask you, Marco, and you can go for this one first. So we have a question from Fran saying, a lot of kids start off in the wrong sport, as in the sport does not suit their body type. I assume, how do we know which sport is best suited to the athlete?
Yeah. Well, we're a little bit jumping ahead with this, because we're going to discuss this later as well. But you can actually ask yourself, what is the wrong sport? Because the first question that you have to ask yourself, do they enjoy it? If they enjoy to do a certain sport, then I think it's the right sport to start with. And it is very important for young children to get a versatile development. And it's actually very good to do a lot of different sports, and don't start with your maybe don't start with the sport that fits you the most. And what fits you the most is actually quite hard to say. It's only that you can only see that after a couple of years. So I don't think that's really a bad sport to start with. I think any sport is good, and I think it's actually a good idea that kids start off with a lot of different sports.
There was an interesting study that looked at after the London 2012 Olympic Games, where obviously GB had a really successful medal haul, and they looked at the development of the athletes that won a medal at those Olympics, British athletes that won a medal, and they actually found that on average, athletes were successful in their third sport that they tried. So it wasn't the first sport they went into, or even the second, but on average the third sport that they tried. So especially at a younger level, and this is something we talk about in the book, you need variety, keep young athletes should still be doing multiple sports and, across very different sort of types of sport as well. So, team games, cycling, potentially, a whole host of things to kind of develop that athlete in a multilateral way, rather than, funneling them into a certain sport straight away, because, that's potentially not the sport that they're going to enjoy the most, that they're going to be the best at, they're going to be most successful at, if you look at it from that perspective. So certainly at a young age, we would encourage athletes to try as many sports, as they can, basically, and find the sport that they enjoy the most. So we have a couple more questions, Marco.
Yeah. I saw the question of Stephen. You already responded to it, but at what age do you realize you have a slow or fast responder? And I think that can even take up to a year of 28 or quite late. And if I look at my brother Matthijs, who is actually when he was a young cyclist in his let's say until he was 14, he couldn't even keep up with the group, with the peloton, and then he just started improving, and by the age of 25, he became a professional. He became a professional rider. So he kept on improving. So he was definitely a slow responder.
Yeah, I mean, I'll actually talk about that in a later slide, but I think roughly around the age of 22, the developmental aspect, so that the kind of the physical development is probably evened out to a level where you can start being saying who has talent or not. And there was another nice study that looked at essentially race performances at under 15s, under 17s, under 19s, and then under 23 level, and who went on to become a professional cyclist. That was carried out in Belgium. And essentially, it wasn't until the age of 19 that you started to actually get a half decent picture, and it even wasn't that great at under 19s about who would go on to be a successful professional cyclist. It wasn't until the under 23 level where it was, you could actually start picking out riders and going, okay, he seems like he's going to be, or she seems like she's going to be successful as an elite. So certainly at those younger ages, race results mean absolutely nothing in terms of future success, if that makes sense. And every time the athlete steps up, it's a clean slate, and okay, we kind of start again. What you've done in the past is not so important anymore. I
see two questions. Is being burned out at 17 or 18 a big issue in sports, and at what age should they focus on one sport? I think we'll address that later, right?
Yeah, we can maybe address the burnout one now. It's a huge problem, especially in young female athletes. I think from memory, the age of 14 to 15 was where 90% of young female athletes stepped out of sports, which is not only terrible from a health perspective, but terrible from you're losing all this talent in sports, and that is a huge problem. And there's probably multiple reasons for that, but it's certainly something we should be kind of looking to address in our coaching and our talent development.
Okay, let's move on a little bit. Growth spurt. Let's talk about the growth spurt. Earlier, I talked about early and late bloomers. A large part of this phenomenon can be explained by the growth spurt. Children grow all the time, up until they're about 18 years old. But around the 13th birthday of a boy and the 11th birthday of a girl, children start to grow really fast. And this is called the growth spurt. This means that a child can grow up to 10, 14 centimeters in 1 year. So that's really a lot. The growth spurt always follows a fixed pattern. First, the hands, the feet, and the head start to grow. Then the arms and the legs become longer, and finally the trunk grows, and then the shoulders start to widen. The growth spurt is an important benchmark in the growth development of a child, because the growth spurt and the period immediately after the growth spurt bring about many physical and emotional changes. And most of these changes are instigated by the increased production of sex hormones like testosterone. And often these physical changes run parallel to the mental and the emotional development. You can imagine that the growth itself and the development of secondary sex characteristics already have a large effect on the mental state of a young athlete. But these changes have such a magnitude that the growth spurt can be used to mark the boundaries of the talent development stages. And James will get into that later. So what can we say about the average growth spurt? The growth spurts start roughly a year before a child reaches his or her peak height velocity. And peak height velocity is the moment when a child grows the fastest. On average, the growth spurt in boys starts when they're roughly 13 years old. They reach their peak height velocity about 1 year later. So you can see it here in the blue graph. So here it starts, peak height velocity right here. The growth spurt roughly coincides with puberty and ends about 6 months after the peak height velocity. So in total, the growth spurts take about 1 year and a half, so from here to here. Compared to boys, the growth spurt in girls starts earlier, on average around 11 years old. Girls do not grow as fast as boys because the body of a girl doesn't produce as much testosterone. A girl often stops growing when she has a first period. So here it starts, peak height velocity. Here she has most of the time her period. The growth spurt in girls is typically lasts about 2 years, so a little bit longer than for boys on average. Now, here's the catch. The growth spurt of an individual can be very different from the average growth spurt. So let's take a detailed look. We have a bit of a complicated graph here. I'm going to explain it. So what are the variations? A child can grow faster or slower than average. They can grow more or less than average. The growth spurt can start earlier or later than average, and it can last longer or shorter. Now let's see if we can see these effects in the graph. This graph is only about the growth spurts for boys. So the solid black line, the one you see right here, the solid black line is the average growth spurt in terms of growth, but also average in terms of timing. This is actually the same graph as we saw on the previous slide. The solid blue line, it shows the average growth spurt of an early developer. So somebody who started the growth spurt earlier. The solid red line shows the average growth spurt of a late developer. You see that 25% of all children will be, the blue line is 25% of all children will be 1 year earlier with a growth spurt than average. However, the earliest developers can have their growth spurt even 2 years earlier than average. On the other hand, look at the solid red line, another 25% were almost 2 years later. So what does this mean? It means that the timing of the growth spurt can give an early developer a physical advantage of about 4 years over a late developer. And we're not only talking about a growth in height, it also means growing more muscle. Testosterone means more muscle. This, of course, more muscle means more power. And this will give early developers a big advantage. And this often leads, results in the fact that early developers win a lot of races when they're at a young age. It doesn't mean that the late developers can't catch up. And in youth cycling, we often see that this happens. But there's another interesting fact here. There are also large differences in how much a boy grows during their growth spurt. The average peak height velocity is about, you can see here, 7 centimeters a year. But the ones that grow the fastest can grow almost 14 centimeters a year. This is represented in the blue, black, and red dotted line at the top. You can see it here. The ones that don't grow a lot only grow about 3 centimeters a year. So we're talking about a difference of 11 centimeters. So you can imagine that this has a large effect. This shows us that we can't look at growth spurt as a uniform phenomenon. It's different for every child. So for coaches and for parents, it is important to know at which stage of the growth development a child at a given moment is, because it should determine how and how much a young athlete trains, but also how we coach and support this young athlete. And James will talk about that later. So just a little picture. This is actually what the graph that we saw on the previous slide. 3 boys, 14 years old. You see a large difference in size. Huh? And this is, you can see the differences in growth spurt here. So, so to have a better understanding of where a young athlete is in terms of development, it's a good idea to monitor when the growth spurt occurs. Again, not only to temper the expectations of the early developers, but also to encourage the late developers to hang in there. And first of all, James and I developed a tool. This is a free tool. Let's see if I can exit here. If I get out of this, get out of the full screen mode here. Let me see. Yeah. I'm sorry. Like this. This is the tool we developed. It's a free online tool. We'll put the URL in the chat. In this tool, you can enter the birth date, the current date, and the sitting and the standing height of a young cyclist. And because of the legs and the trunk grow at different rates, you can make an estimate when the growth spurt will occur or if it already happened. This method is also used in the athletic skill model by the soccer club Ajax. So it's a well-known model, a well-known tool. The easiest way to assess where a child is in his development is to look at a child. Let's go back to the slides here. Started something here, huh? So yeah, good.
I warned you, Marco. It's the last time you're given any sort of control.
Easiest way to assess where a child is in his development is to look at a child. And I'll go through the list here. Signs that the growth spurt has started. They want to eat all the time. They are very hungry. The legs of their trousers are suddenly too short. They are sleeping all the time. They get clumsier. They start having acne. Their voice start to deepen. There are other ways for coaches to determine when the growth spurt started. But the most important one for coaches is to talk to the parents. Because you, as parents, probably know very well what happens to your child. Because you see your child every day. So my advice, talk to the coach. So the coach knows what is happening. So the coach can adjust the training of the young athletes according to their level. For the girls, the end of the growth spurt is easy to determine. Like I said, it's about the time that they start having a period. For boys and girls, you can determine the end of the growth spurt by calculating ahead. You can, when you know the start of the growth spurt, you know the end is about 1.5 years later for the boys and 2 years later for the girls. Another more technical approach is monitoring weight, because peak height velocity correlates strongly with peak weight velocity. But that's a more technical thing to do, probably more something to do for the coaches. So that was a lot of information about growth development. But let's see how the growth spurt defines the stages of development. James.
Okay, this is me. So on the screen, you will see what we believe are what we've put together in our book as the stages of development and a description of each stage. So we will get onto this in the next slide, but essentially the growth spurt defines which stage a young cyclist is in. So in the foundation stage, they haven't yet started their growth spurt, okay? And so the foundation stage is all about essentially active play. Learn, having fun, building confidence in their own abilities, okay? So there's very little structure to any training. Coaches, in inverted commas, are more session leaders at that point. And it's all about essentially active play, fun, having confidence and building that confidence in your own ability, okay? Typically, athletes move into building stage 1 as the growth spurt starts. So some things, there's obviously quite a lot of changes during that period. So typically before that, in the foundation stage, we actually see a nice gradual development, gradual progress in development of young athletes. However, moving into building stage 1, that development can start coming in fits and spurts. So it's really important in this stage that we don't put too much pressure on athletes, because they may improve at times and quite quickly, and at other times they might not improve as quickly. Also, coordination, because of the lengthening of the limbs, tends to decrease a little bit in this stage, and therefore we need to be again take that into consideration. So some of the things that we're looking to improve or help develop during this stage are coordination, cycling skills, and still that confidence, building that confidence in their own ability. That's confidence issue is particularly pertinent, considering that development might come in fits and starts. Okay, so if I had to kind of give 2 buzzwords for this stage, I would say it's certainly about learning. So it's about learning the skills of cycling, learning, in that process. So we've moved from, let's say, play in the foundation stage to learning in building stage 1. But we've still got that multi-sport focus. So that this is not the time to be focusing on a single sport. We still encourage athletes to, participate in multi-sports across kind of, different genres of sport as well, to help them develop as more all-round athletes rather than specialists. Young athletes typically enter the next stage, so building stage 2, towards the end or at the end of the growth spurt. Okay, so this is the stage where we start building that engine, if you like. That's, sort of their physical capacity. So this is a great point to start with some strength work, and be that potentially just body weight at the very start, and to start building that aerobic kind of engine to start turning them into more and more of an athlete, okay? Typically in this stage, we still don't encourage riders to specialize into one sport or another, but typically what you tend to see is that riders start to specialize by either more endurance type sports or more sprint type sports. Okay, so typically, you wouldn't have someone that's a track sprinter and a long distance trail runner, for example. Do you know what I mean? That they're a bit incompatible. Although, to be honest, it wouldn't be the end of the world still. Okay, and some of the things that, if we've moved from play to learning, we're now moving into practicing. So the skills and the development of these athletes is getting a little bit more formalized, and they're learning, they're practicing those skills that they've picked up during building stage 1. Okay, so we've got that endurance versus sprint, roughly, still multi-sport in building stage 2, but we're moving from learning into practicing skills. Okay, so that takes us into,
Just a moment.
oh, sorry, I've got Siri trying to talk to me. That takes us into the specialization stage. So the specialization stage is a really important stage for riders that want to go on to deliver elite performances, essentially, okay? This is the stage typically where we start seeing a cycling only focus. And we'll get onto what age that is, and that's dependent a little bit on the growth spurt, etc., in a subsequent slide. That doesn't mean being a road rider or being a mountain biker or being a track rider. We're talking about a single sport, but we can still certainly practice multiple disciplines within that sport, okay? Now's the time that people start perfecting those skills. So we've learned those skills in building stage 1, we've practiced them in building stage 2, and as we move into the personalization stage, we are perfecting those skills. Now, this is a really important stage to develop what we call a performance lifestyle, okay? So what we don't mean by performance lifestyle is, very strict training and living like a professional athlete. What we mean by that is developing a way of life that allows that young athlete to perform at their best. So it's not just a training thing, but also how they, are in their general life, how they balance school, social life with cycling, how they handle the pressure of competition, which starts to build in this stage as well. So this stage is really key in terms of development within that performance lifestyle. And actually, having worked with a lot of elite athletes myself, a trend that I see is that performance lifestyle hasn't been developed at an early age, and we end up spending a lot of work later on down the line developing that kind of performance lifestyle when maybe it should have been developed at an earlier stage. Once that rider's gone through the specialization stage, then we're into performance stage 1. Okay, so this is again cycling only, probably a limited number of disciplines. So we can combine track and road, for example, but now it's about delivering performances. So this is the first stage where delivering performances, really comes to the fore, really. And typically, it's about executing performances. So we've gone from play to learning to practicing to perfecting, and now it's time to execute all those things that you've learned throughout, the rest of the development stages. So this is your elite career, if you want to kind of term it like this. And it's actually really important in this stage that the athlete, the coach, and their surrounding entourage, so parents included in that, recognize that window of delivering elite performances is limited. So, it depends a little bit on the athlete, but you may have 10, 12 years where you can deliver those elite performances, 10, 12 years where you might be able to make a living from cycling as a career, okay? After that, the performance stage 2, and actually we can kind of squidge these two together a little bit, is that active lifestyle. We've coined it here as competitive for a lifestyle, but it's taking, that all those social connections that you have from cycling, all those great habits that you've developed in some of the earlier stages that are going to help you not only in a cycling sphere, but also in, a personal sphere in your kind of professional career. Taking that into the rest of your life to stay healthy, to stay active, and all the benefits that brings. So that takes us through the 6 stages of development, from play to multi-sport, rough endurance versus sprint, cycling focus, and then cycling only on one side, and then from a play to learning to practicing to predicting to executing on the other side of things.
Next.
Yes, please. So here, what we've done is we have mapped the different growth spurts, and here we've just got very late, average, and very early, onto a timeline of age, okay? And you can see that the development stages are anchored to the growth spurt rather than to any particular calendar age, okay? So if you've got someone in the above example for men with a very late growth spurt, the first build stage might not be until the age of 15, whereas someone with a very early growth spurt, it might already start at the age of 11. For women on the bottom graph here, that building stage 1 might start as early as 8, run 8 to 10, but in someone with a very late growth spurt will actually run from kind of 13.5 to 15.5, something like that, okay? If you look at these graphs, you will see that in the case for both men and women, things don't really even out and everyone's in the same development stage until the age of 22 potentially. And So it's not really until that age that we know what we're dealing with in terms of, is this athlete potentially going to make it to as an elite athlete, okay? And even then, that's only when the very late developers enter the performance stage 1, okay? There's still a lot of learning and a lot of growing that takes place during performance stage 1. So as Marco alluded to earlier, it might not be until 24, 25, 26, even 27 sometimes that, everyone's at a peak in their career and we can actually start really comparing athletes. So that's how the growth spurt maps onto the developmental stages and how that can look for early, late and average developers, and how calendar age, so their age, isn't actually an important factor as much as the growth spurts. So we talked earlier about riders trying multiple sports. Okay, so typically, at a young age, we really want to encourage young athletes to participate in a wide number of sports. That means that, cycling might not be the first sport for all riders or all young athletes, okay? So quite often, you get young athletes that try other sports and then want to try cycling, come into cycling. So not only is the developmental age where that growth spurt occurs important in terms of defining which developmental stage an athlete should be in, but also their training age. So this is the amount of time they've been in formal sport, if you like. Okay. So
James, just to interrupt you for a little bit, it also happens that people start with cycling at the age of 16 and didn't do any sport before.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's not as clear cut as it was on the last graph, unfortunately. It'd make our lives as coaches much easier. And what we typically have to say is, okay, we have to look at what that athlete's done previously and how much training they've accumulated, be that in other sports, before entering a certain stage, okay? So if you jump in at, let's say, the specialization stage because, you've finished your growth spurt, you've come into cycling, you're actually going to miss out all that development, all that learning in the foundation, building stage 1 and building stage 2. We obviously don't want that because that's going to lead to cyclists that are, underdeveloped in terms of some of their other skills, potentially not their physical skills, but maybe their tactical skills, their bike riding skills, etc. And what we actually recommend is that in an ideal world, everyone would go through every stage of development. Sometimes that is a little bit unfeasible if athletes are coming into the sport late, but it's always better to go through as many of those stages as possible. Okay. And when we're looking at, which stage an athlete might come in at when they're coming into cycling, we also need to assess which sport they've done previously. So it may be if an athlete was into running, for example, or athletics, they've actually done a lot of that physical development. And therefore, can maybe come in at building stage 1 rather than the foundation stage. But it's very specific to the athlete, what their background is. And these training age recommendations are just that. They're a recommendation of roughly how many years in cycling we would like a cyclist to have in an ideal world before entering a given developmental stage.
Okay. Do we have some questions?
Let's have a look.
Not yet, I think.
Hopefully, Peter, that answers your question about when an athlete should focus on one sport. Essentially, yeah, we're saying that only really in the specialization sport and the specialization stage should athletes focus on only cycling. Up until that point, multilateral training is best, but that doesn't mean that they should be focusing on one particular discipline.
Okay, let's move on. Up to now, James and I gave you an introduction on some of the themes that are important in talent development. I can imagine that there are all kinds of dilemmas about your own child popping up in your head right now. So please feel free to ask us any questions. So don't hesitate. You can put your questions in Hypersay, and we will address it at the end of our talk. So I want to tell you a bit about the 9 core values that we described in our book. And the first core value that we formulated was talent development for everyone. As already highlighted in the introduction, this means that we are aiming to develop every rider, no matter what level. And first of all, it means that we leave no one behind. And this is a knife that cuts both ways. We increase the success rate talent selection by enlarging the group that may reach top level. Developing everyone increases the chance that also the late developers reach their potential. And 2, we raise the skill and performance level of every rider. We make sure that everyone has an opportunity to develop and grow and enjoy themselves in the process. So in order to do so, the best way for a young cyclist is to focus on his or her own learning process. Try to improve personal skills and abilities rather than to compare to others. The most important result of such a learning orientation is not even that the level of a young cyclist increases, but he or she will become more motivated and more confident in their abilities as they experience small successes along the way. And of course, results are an important factor in racing, but it's only the end result. In the long run, it is about sustaining motivation, and motivation will drive talent development in the end. So the fact that motivation is so important is also the reason why the individual cyclist should always be at the center of the development process, as you can see here in the picture. Every young athlete is a unique individual, unique in their potential, unique in how they develop, but also unique in what he or she likes and dislikes. And this is an important starting point for parents and for coaches. By connecting to the abilities of a child, what they can do, and connecting to his or her drive/aspirations, what they really want, and connecting to his or her resources to achieve their goals, we increase their motivation level. Some kids just want to be part of the group and have a good time, while others want to win races. But all these things are fine, just as long, for example, an obsession about winning races is not obstructing long-term development, because in the long run, that's what we want. Long-term development, because this will lead to an active lifestyle or even to elite performance. So we talked about talent development for everyone and the individual at the center. But 2 other factors are very important in raising the level of motivation for a young athlete. And these are playful practice and preparing individuals to be independent and to make their own choices. And especially the young athletes at the foundation stage, building stage 1, it should all be about fun. A focus on results in these early stages, especially for the young athletes, may interfere with the development process later. And why is this, you might ask? Children still have to learn a lot of things. It is normal to feel insecure when you haven't mastered certain skills yet. So you want to make sure that a child has a positive experience learning new skills, because a mastery experience boosts self-confidence. It gives pride to become better at things, and as such creates an upward learning spiral. And that's what we want. A negative experience, on the other hand, may lead to loss of confidence. And as a result, a child may be less inclined to leave their comfort zone. And as you may well know, to learn, you need to leave your comfort zone. So that is why we need playful practice. And playful practice means that the young athletes are able to experiment without pressure or judgment on how well they perform. And in this context, we want to give these children challenges that are just out of their comfort zone. Challenges that they still enjoy, and that are gradually more difficult to complete. And every time they're successful, they will become more confident, and the motivation to improve will increase even more. So that's playful practice. Another value is preparing individuals to be independent so they will be able to make their own choices. And this is increasingly important as a child moves through the building stages and the specialization stage. This value is also linked to increasing and sustaining a cyclist's motivation. Being in control, following your own path leads to more motivation. Outside pressure, on the other hand, reduces motivation. So particularly when an athlete grows older, it is important that they are enabled to take the development process more and more in their own hands. So it goes without saying that the parents and the coach are crucial in this process. This is another core value in our book. The main contribution of parents and coaches to the talent development is to create an environment in which the young athlete can prosper. The role of the coach and the parents will shift when the child grows older. James will talk about this in the next slide. So then we have four core values left, and they're all related to training. Stages of development are based on growth development in training age, like James just discussed. Then we have first an athlete, then a specialist, the right training at the right time, and the right balance between stress and recovery. Well, these values are more important for the coaches than for the parents. But I do want to highlight two things that parents should keep in mind. Something that we see often in youth cycling, and that is really detrimental to the development in young athletes, is the desire to specialize too early. And I'm talking now about the core value, first an athlete, then a specialist. So what I mean by this is that young riders, especially in the foundation and building stages, train too much with the aim to improve their performance in races. And they do this by doing a lot of interval training, so-called specialized training. But research shows, and we talked about the multiple sports, but research shows that training too specialized at an early age can lead to injury, but it will also hinder performance in the long run. For these younger riders, it's better to train more diverse and versatile. This means besides cycling, they should run, swim, jump, do any kind of sport, basically. And this will lead to a more balanced development. So the last thing I want to say is, before James is going to take over, is this. And this is about the right balance between stress and recovery. Parents and coaches should aim for the right balance, because we often forget that stress is not only training stress. Stress is also homework, the situation at home, life events, etc. It is easy to overload a child, and we have to make sure that the child also has enough recovery time. So if you feel as parents that your child is overloaded by school, by training, and the training your child does at the club adds to this, please communicate with your club coach and discuss how to reduce the load. I think that wraps it up for me. James, please go ahead and tell us a bit about the changing role of parents and coaches.
Yes, thanks, Marco. So you're probably wondering at this point, okay, how does my role as a parent fit into all these developmental stages, helping my child to develop and go through those stages? What we wanted to stress in this slide is that your role as a parent will change dependent upon the developmental stage that your child is at. The role of their coach, or their club coach or their personal coach, depending on the stage, will also change. However, what I would stress throughout this entire process is a need for clear communication between yourselves as parents and the coach that's working with that athlete at the time. You both get to see a slightly different side of the young athlete, and it's important to keep those communication lines open, because then you're going to best be able to support that athlete together. So I'm going to whip through the coach's role, and then I'll come to the parent's role. So typically in the foundation stage, we are looking at activity coaches. So as the focus is predominantly on play and being active and building confidence, in that stage, we want children, performing activities rather than structured training sessions, okay? As we move into building stage 1, what we typically see is a more and more process-focused sort of coaching, okay? So, we're moving into the, the learning and practicing sort of areas when we're moving into building stage 1 and stage 2. And therefore, it's important that the sessions become a little bit more structured to enable that. It's probably not until athletes move into the specialization stage that they need to start working kind of personally with a coach. And at that point, the coach is, almost in charge of their development and their training and what they're doing to develop, as a cyclist during that phase. And the coach can actually help the athlete at that point to develop that sort of performance lifestyle that we spoke about earlier, and that can be very much coach-led, but obviously giving the athlete the autonomy within that. As we move into the performance stage, and this is how I find I work with a lot of athletes, they're colleagues rather than a coach-athlete relationship. Okay. So obviously the parent's role is going to change as well, so we'll talk about that. In the very early stages, I think it's all about encouragement, and that needs to be the one key factor. So just encouraging your child to be active, to try as many things, to do what they find is fun, and to find the sport that they enjoy the most, and encourage them to try as many things as possible, and also encourage them in the sports that they're doing to try and build that confidence. Okay, so we want actually throughout this process very little pressure on the athlete, but the key focus in that early stage is just encouragement, development of self-confidence, really praising the child for, okay, that was brilliant, you tried that, etc., etc. Okay, so as we move into building stages kind of 1 and 2, it's more about creating a supportive atmosphere for when the child is in that learning process. So we're learning and practicing in these 2 stages, and obviously that doesn't always go perfectly. We try something, we fail at it, we try something, we fail at it, and that is the process of learning and practicing. And we keep doing that process until we can actually, master that skill or master what we're ever trying to do. So therefore, if we had to have a kind of a key buzzword, if you like, for those 2 stages, it's about being supportive of the athlete in that process. Obviously we're still encouraging them, but it's really about, actually that was really, good what you tried there. It was good that you tried something different. It was good that you approached that different. We're not worried too much about the outcomes. The outcomes will come just with the practice. So it's about supporting and encouraging the practice and the learning in those 2 stages. Now, I'm sure kind of, as parents, financial support is always going to kind of come in. And to be honest, that's going to come in the specialization stage. So that's typically, when riders are going away to races on a more regular basis. There is a higher cost kind of element at that point. I think the moving into a more kind of financially supportive role kind of probably comes in with the coach coming in, because they're taking over some of that kind of direction in terms of, directing the practice, directing the sessions, etc. So that is certainly a process, and that's probably the trickiest sort of time to balance the coach parent relationship. Typically in the foundation stage and building stages 1 and 2, it's very much athlete focused and everyone's kind of on a team together. But when you get that coach coming in and taking a more controlling role, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but controlling the sessions, giving more structure, that's typically when we need the parent to take a step back from that role, and kind of start being more supportive from the outside rather from the inside. And then as that athlete moves into later life, you become their number 1 supporter, and get to watch your child blossom and perform and get to kind of reap the rewards from the sidelines of all those kind of, you know, hours and hours that you've seen your child practice and all the hard work they've put in. So that's the point as a parent, where you can kind of sit back and enjoy watching the process, I guess. So that's kind of how we see the role of parents and coaches changing throughout the process. Obviously, this is very broad, this slide, and we've just tried to kind of distill it down to the key concepts in each individual stage. And it's important to remember that the mental development of children follows roughly, but not always, with the growth spurt. So, you know, we have to be kind of quite flexible in our approach. Some athletes might be ready to move on to kind of, you know, learning and practicing earlier on. Others may still want to stay in that, you know, just fun, pressureless environment. So, you know, as a parent, you're probably in a great place to be able to see that. And it's important that you kind of communicate that with coaches as well. Do you have anything to add on that slide, Marco?
Yeah, that brings us to the end of our presentation.
Yes.
So I think we have some questions here. Let me see.
Yes, we have lots of questions.
Why did we?
So I'll go through them in order.
Okay.
Oh, do you want to go through them, Gary?
No, it's grand. No, you can fire ahead. You probably answered my question there anyway, so that's fine.
We have one from Peter. How do you stop your child from doing too much when they are overzealous? Do you want to take that one, Marco?
Where is the question? I don't see it. Is it...
A little bit down there. You go. You just had your mouse on it. It's just in the chat there.
Oh yeah. Okay. Overzealous. That means that they
want to do more and more and more, and they want to progress, and they want to get better, and they just want to do more and more and more.
Yeah. Well, overzealous. Yeah, it's difficult to define what it is, huh? Because if it means that if they want to do very specific training to improve their performance in races, if they're overzealous with that and they're at a young age, then it's probably time to slow them down a bit. If they want to play and be out and do a lot of sports, actually that's all a good thing. But what we always have to look at, of course, is the balance between stress and recovery. So if it's too much, and also if you combine it with schoolwork and stuff like that, then you should try to slow them down a bit. But too much sport, especially when it's different sports, that's not very quickly too much. Huh? I think you can go a long way with that, as long as it doesn't overstress the child.
Yeah, I think I'm going to sort of wrap Peter and Gary's question, which is what's your thoughts on dealing with kids whose training age is ahead of their growth development, into sort of one answer here. This is something we actually do with coaches quite a lot. So, you know, when you've got a child that's really motivated and wants to do more and more and more, I think you know, we need to sort of harness that energy, if that makes sense. That, you know, that's brilliant that they want to be active and they want to do more and more and more. And so something that I encourage coaches to do, and this is actually in our presentation next week, so a bit of a spoiler, but is to essentially carry out a needs analysis. So what I mean by that is we look at a number of areas. So physical development, mental development, sort of performance lifestyle, skills, tactical, and pick 3 or 4 things under each heading. So it might be, you know, sprint power under one, it might be a bunny hopping under the skills, for example, and it might be, you know, ability to wash their own bike and pack their bags or whatever to go away for the weekend to a race in terms of performance lifestyle, and rank the current importance of those things. So how important are they for the development of this child, but also rank where they are in comparison with their peers at the moment. Okay, so you might think that I don't know, threshold power is the most important thing, but you might also think that they're way ahead of their peers at the moment. And if you think, you know, if you give each one a 1 and you times them by each other, then you only get a 1 out. So actually it comes out very low on your priority scale. Whereas if you've got something that you maybe don't think is that important, maybe it scores a 5 out of 15, something like that, and you, you know, but it's that particular child is quite a long way behind their peers in that particular skill or that particular element, then that suddenly scores really high, and that's where you should focus. So it's almost in a needs analysis as you go along, and then the focus tends to come away a little bit from kind of the physical development, which we get very blinkered into, and actually that kind of that tool can help develop athletes a bit more holistically. So that's what I'd say to how do you stop, you know, sort of children when they're overzealous, or you know, when they really want to crack on with training. I'd say harness that into the areas where, you know, not just the physical areas, but kind of, you know, skills or whatever it is that you think is kind of important, or where they're, you know, in comparison to their peers.
James, I'm not sure if you see there's a question on the Zoom chat there. I'm not sure if you've.
Yeah, I can pull that. Pull that up. I've got my. I've got you guys over it. Any advice on getting kids motivated again when they haven't done enough and can see the gap to their peers growing, so they do even less as they can't understand how to bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's a difficult one, huh? And I deal with this as a coach. Well, it happens. I'm coaching a lot of juniors, and especially the guys that are good sprinters. They used to outperform a lot of other riders at an early age, because the races are short, and then it's easy to win the sprint. And then they go to a junior level, the races become longer, and they have to start to train. And it's difficult for them. And suddenly they have to be on the bike for 4 hours, maybe 5 hours, and then they're not used to it. So it's very difficult to get them into this mode. What I try to do is try to find out what is important to them. And some of these riders, one of the things they like about cycling is the social aspect. So if they have to train long, they have to. It's a good idea to tell them find some mates, to try to find some other cyclists to go with, and then it's much easier to do 4 hours or 5 hours on the bike. So you have to sort of find the switch that will turn them on. You have to find out what is important to them and what do they like, and try to encourage them through this channel, I think. That is so this is an individual thing. You have to look at each different rider to see what matters to them.
Yeah, I'd agree with that for sure. I think it's typically a problem during what we call build stage 1 and build stage 2. So that's during and just after the growth spurt. So during the growth spurt, you know, young athletes tend to develop in fits and starts. So there's not this kind of linear progression that, you know, everyone kind of thinks that they should follow. Everything's a little bit all over the place, and you know, they will improve quickly at times and then not so quickly at other times. And even some skills can actually go backwards a little bit due to loss of coordination. And what can happen is that if you get one particular athlete that's on a bit of a dip and all his mates are on a bit of a rise, then suddenly those gaps can sort of you know, widen. And I think, like Marco says, it's coming back to what, you know, what is the intrinsic motivation of that young athlete to ride or whatever sport they're actually in, and why are they doing it? But also sometimes kind of zooming out and explaining this to them. You know what I mean? That like, in 6 months' time, you'll be in the ascendant and your mates might be struggling a little bit more. Can be helpful at times to, you know, almost try and show them the bigger picture a little bit as well, in terms of, okay, you know, like this is a stage where everyone is a little bit up and down. Don't worry, you know, it will come back naturally. But it's certainly a difficult situation. And I don't think there's one particular correct answer. But going back to what what the intrinsic motivation of the young athlete is probably a really good starting point.
We have a question by Gary about the training age, right? What's your thoughts on dealing with kids whose training age is ahead of their growth development? And I think there's a little bit of a misconception about what training age means in terms of the stages. So I go back a little bit. Okay, we have the training age here. So typically, when you look at the stages, we're looking at the scenario that a young child goes through all the stages, from 8 years old all the way up to junior or under 23 level. So it happens a lot that a child starts early and then just goes through all the stages. But it also happens that a child starts later with cycling. And when it starts later at cycling, and especially when it starts at an age, or at, I should say, when the growth spurt has already started or has already finished, then he sort of missed a part of his or her development. So what you want to do, and I'll go now to the training age. When somebody enters at a later stage, for example, somebody enters when the growth spurt has already ended, and this person should be in building stage 2, but he hasn't done any cycling yet, then it's a good idea to go back a little bit. So you can only we argue that it's a good idea that you enter building stage 2 when you had a training age of about 3 to 6 years. So that means 3 to 6 years of good general training, and also but you still want to go through all the phases, but you want to compress those stages a little bit. Yeah, so the training age can't be really ahead of the growth development. The growth development is a fact, and somebody enters, and then you look at the training age, and they need a certain training age before they enter a certain stage. Especially when, for example, the specialization phase, even if somebody is 18 and then the growth spurt is long over, and they should enter the specialization phase, they're not ready to do specialized training because they don't have a proper base. So they need at least six years of a proper base training, and then aerobic training in the case of road riders to enter the specialization stage. Is that clear? Gary?
Yeah, it was another Gary, I think so it was, but yeah, that's very clear. We have a question on the Zoom question and answer. What are your thoughts on competition for under 12, under 16? And which disciplines are better for those ages?
Shall I start with that one, Marco?
Yeah, sure.
In terms of what cycling disciplines are best, whichever ones they fancy doing, to be perfectly honest, at that stage, as varied as possible. And I certainly wouldn't blink it into purely road cycling at that age. We only need to look at kind of who the best road cyclists in the world are at the moment, and where they came from. They came from cyclocross, mountain biking, to know that that skill development needs to happen at a relatively early age. So I think, discipline-wise, as wider a selection of disciplines. I remember at that age, I was personally doing road, cycle speedway, grass track, a little bit of BMX, a little bit of mountain biking, a little bit of cyclocross. So as varied as possible. At that sort of age, to be honest. Do you want to take the amount of competition, Marco?
Yes. They say that especially in the early stages, it should all be about fun. And then there are people that are saying, okay, when it's only about fun, they shouldn't do any races. I disagree on this because races are a very good learning possibility, a learning opportunity for a rider. So doing races is good even at an early age. What we shouldn't do is attach too much value to the result of a race, and that's a different thing. I mean, you can say it's great that you won the race, or you can say it's great that you really pushed yourself and you did your best. So there's a discussion in the Netherlands also about should we do Dutch championships for 10 years old or 8-year-olds, and that's a different thing because with the Dutch championships you get the Dutch jersey, the red, white, and blue, and then it's very hard not to look at the results and put the guys and girls that on the pedestal and say, oh, you became Dutch champion. And I don't think that's a very good thing to do, because especially the early developers that win a lot of races, it happened. A girl came to me just the other year. She was Dutch champion 7 times. Every category she won the Dutch championship. And then she came to me and said, yeah, they're catching up with me and I need to improve myself. And then we started working together, and it turned out it was just very hard for her to motivate herself to continue to race. So I think races are good as a learning experience, but don't attach too much emphasis on the result.
I think even more they're important at a young age, races are, because there shouldn't be that big step into competition. It shouldn't feel like a daunting step to make. It's slightly, if you don't have enough competition to start with, then it becomes this big step to move into competition. And actually, I think it's a role for coaches to smooth that transition as much as possible. So I think races are great at an early age, and it's fun to compete and all that sort of stuff. But like Marco said, we shouldn't be hanging importance on the outcome of those races. It should be about, racing for the fun of it, competing against your friends, laughing and joke about it afterwards. It's only when we start attaching importance that we get issues with kind of, too many races, or really.
We have a question from Louis. Given the huge number of girls that leave the sport in their mid-teens, are there any good approaches to maintaining interest for girls, in particular during those years?
It's a great question. I'm racking my brains to remember some of the research on this, but I think that there was a big study done about why we lose so many young female athletes at that sort of age, mid-teens, and there's a number there's a number of issues. So it's obviously kind of physical changes, social pressure, etc. But I think the groups in which there are strong social connections tend to keep more cyclists, both men and women, within the sport. So I think, especially at that teen age, having a social connection as well as being a sport, if that makes sense, is really key to keeping young athletes in the sport. And I think there's a great example of that in the Netherlands at the moment, where you've got a really strong group of relatively young now, so they're kind of let's say 18 to 25 female cyclists that have stayed in the sport. And I know in the Netherlands they did a kind of a big thing in cyclocross about having those group sessions, that it is a social activity as well as a physical training session, and that's kept a lot of young female cyclists in the sport that may have otherwise stepped out of the sport, and they're kind of now dominating. So I would say for both women and young men, there needs to be a social aspect to the to cycling as much as a physical sort of sporting aspect.
Yeah, I definitely agree. And one of the issues that arise when these girls come into their mid-teens, up until that time, when the growth spurt hasn't started yet, the girls and the boys are at the same level. Only after the growth spurt has ended, then the difference between the boys and the girls becomes much larger. And then because the boys develop more muscle and therefore more power. So the circles that they had, the social circles that they had before are changing. And suddenly they're sort of on their own and they have to find other girls to compete with. They can't really compete with the boys anymore. So I think that aspect also adds to the fact that it's more difficult to maintain yourself.
Yeah, that's Margot, I think, has just sent in there that the Cycling Ireland have that Bike Like Me program, which is sort of aimed at that. And I think one of the issues, especially in Ireland, has been that our focus is so much on performance that we forget about the participation. So if they're no longer interested in performing, there is no participation pathway, or there hasn't been in the past. So they just drop out of the sport altogether. And I think, hopefully the work that's going on at the minute will fill that void, that they can still ride their bike and enjoy riding their bike and perform and drop in and out of that. So hopefully that's what's in it. I say Margot's just posted the link to that in the Zoom chat that I'll take them to information around that.
Yeah. But in that sense, cycling is a very difficult sport. Huh? I mean, it's very competitive. And well, when you're a junior or just below junior, you really have to train to keep up. And otherwise, you just dropped at the end of the peloton and you can go home. So it's not a sport that you can do very leisurely, I would say. So that makes it, so it would be good to have different levels if you have enough riders. But James is right that the social aspect is very important. And we had a large survey here in Holland about this. And actually, the social aspect turned out to be the most binding factor that made sure that people stayed in the sport, and not so much the racing. It's just being in a club and training together and having friends.
Cool. And a question from Brian Crinnan on the chat around how do you approach the subject of bigger is not always better, especially when GAAs, that's Gaelic games here, and rugby playing is all about size. And so he posted a link about a former, well, a cyclist who's moved to play Gaelic football, and he's put on, I think, 20 kilos in weight to be strong enough for his position. And I assume, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, Brian, you're talking about that maybe young males who are focused on getting bigger, maybe bigger muscles, and that might not be better for their bike. Is that around what you're saying? I wonder if you can maybe comment on that. But if that's the case, is there a size, and maybe to stretch that question out, is there an inverse to that where within cycling it goes the other way?
It's probably in cycling probably the other way around.
Yeah,
we don't want too much size, of course, because weight is definitely a performance factor. That being said, we're talking about youth cycling, about young riders, and I don't think we should make weight a big issue. Of course, in the end, especially when cyclists go uphill, weight is a big factor. But then we're talking about performance, and then we're at later stages, I would say. And one of the problems in cycling, but in sports in general, is that people don't eat enough. And when you cycle for a long time, you need to eat quite a bit. And if you don't eat enough, your bodily functions start to not function well. So eating enough is important, but the weight is something that to consider later in I would say in performance stage 1, and maybe a little bit in the specialization phase.
Yeah, I don't talk about if we're talking about power numbers or anything like that. I don't normalize any of that to body weight until performance stage 1. So if we're talking about performance with junior athletes or anyone under the age of probably 19, 20 even, and I make a conscious effort not to talk about weight as a performance factor. you know, young athletes are still developing, so we don't want to be focusing on being, you know, a certain weight, and yeah, we see generally, to be honest, the opposite problem, that young athletes think they have to look like, you know, those photos that we've all probably seen of Chris Froome, you know, after the Tour of France. That tends to become the, you know, what cyclists believe they should look like, and actually that's certainly not the case, and it's certainly not healthy to be, you know, at that lower body fat percentage at an early age. So I think focusing more on fueling, you know, moving the conversation from weight to fueling is probably a healthy way to go, and talk about, you know, fueling this session and fueling your recovery and fueling your day at school is certainly a healthier way to talk to athletes about nutrition than focusing on the weight.
Cheers for that, James and Marco. We've just maybe got a couple of minutes to wrap some up. I'm not sure if you've a particular question in there that you want to answer. While you're maybe looking at those, it's just anybody that's on the call, Cycling Connacht are doing a live stream with David O'Loughlin, Olympian, and it's on tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock, and it's on Facebook on Connacht Cycling. I'll try and post a link in the chat, so if anybody wants to go to that.
We've got a few comments about the financial support starting at much earlier age. Yeah, of course, I appreciate that. And yeah, it's an ongoing commitment for sure. I think what the point I was trying to make is it's probably your, you know, as riders move into that specialization stage, obviously the financial support kind of, you know, demand stays there, but you maybe parents, you know, should maybe take a slight back seat on some other issues, especially around kind of coaching and that sort of stuff. So yeah, it's not that the financial support starts then, it's more that it's the other things maybe fall away a little bit, and you move into that more of that financial supporter and general supporter role than obviously than maybe at an earlier age.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, James. Marco, we'll maybe just finish off. I'm not sure if you have any closing words you'd like to add to it, or if you are happy enough, but from Cycling Ireland and from myself, thank you very much for this evening. It's been very enjoyable, and you know, there's lots of things that I've taken out of that, and this is my background as well, so it's been very good.
That's great. Good to hear.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks very much, everybody, for logging on. And if you have any questions, I'm sure the email that you got about registration and stuff like that, you can just drop us a line and we can come back to you on it. And thank you all very much.
Someone's asking if a copy will be online as well.
Yeah, so it is recorded. So hopefully at some point we'll get that put up. I'm not sure exactly where it'll go, but I'm sure we'll send you an email and let you know where that's going to.
Okay, great.
All right, guys.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
All right, guys. Thank you. Bye.